All right. Well, good. I'm doing two, actually four places that I'm streaming to right now. And if you're watching in one of these two places over here, the video is not as good because of the quality of the camera, I think. But this one is pretty good. But I think I'll be able to get this together regardless. So thank you for joining me. And I see that somebody's already joined me over here, and I appreciate that. And I'm going to talk on the, first of all, welcome to Saturday morning. We've got storms supposed to be rolling in here this morning. And anyway, I'm just going to entertain myself because that's what I do. And as you see, the subject matter is critical thinking. And reminder again, the storms are supposed to be rolling in. Been a little bit of rain this morning, some winds. Who knows what to anticipate? Keep your eyes open. Pay close attention, if you will, to what's going on with the weather in your vicinity. Sometimes it gets hyped up in a ridiculous level and nothing happens, but it's better to be prepared than not. If you know anything about the church that IOCCHURCH, I call it the Church of Preparedness, practical preparedness. I've written a book. I've got the manuscript over here to my right, and it is regards to practical preparedness. It's not a question of when. It's not a question of will a tornado hit. It is only a question of when and where it will hit. Historically, we know certain things will happen that it's just nature and human error and so forth, from accidents and so forth. So it's better to be practical preparedness. You carry insurance not because you want a car wreck, not because you're just sitting in anticipation of a car wreck. You carry insurance because you know stuff happens. That's the reason we carry against theft. We carry against our house. We carry insurance on ourselves not because we want something to happen. It's just things do happen, and we try to be in a practical level prepared for it. The big thing that we're dealing with right now, well, a lot of people are talking about it. It's what's going on with this plane in Iran. This, yeah. And, let me get back over here. Where was that? Get to the right place. Nope, I lost it. Already closed the page out. I'm trying to get something to share here. Just bear with me 1 second. So, if you've been paying attention to this Ukrainian jetliner that was shot down and killed a bunch of people, and then Iran just came out and stated that they were pressured into taking responsibility of accidentally shooting this civilian plane down out of the skies and killing all these people. Really, either way you look at it, a sad story. So I posted about 25 minutes ago on Facebook. For those who either have short memories or little knowledge of our history with Iran, going back to Iran Air Flight 655, and this is something to take into consideration here. I'm going to share this with you, and I want you to think about this, and then we're going to talk about all the other things that our nation has been involved with over the years. This was an aviation disaster over the Strait of Hormuz in the Persian Gulf. This occurred in 1988. Iran Air Flight 655. It was a flight of an Iranian airliner, and it was shot down by the missile cruiser USS Vincennes on July 3rd, 1988, over the Strait of Hormuz, killing all 290 people on board. The passenger plane, which was in Iranian airspace, had been incorrectly identified as a jetliner. Incorrectly identified by whom? By the United States. In July of 88, Iran and Iraq were in the middle of a war. And that war included attacks on each other's soil oil tankers in the Persian Gulf. The United States was among several countries that had warships in the area to safeguard the transport of oil. It's all about the oil, guys. I don't care how you paint it. It's all about the oil. Get real. It's a fact. They didn't care about the war between Iran and Iraq. They were concerned about the transport of oil. So several incidents, notably an attack on the USS Stark involving Iraq missiles in May of '87, had resulted in a revision of the U.S. rules of engagement, allowing U.S. ships in the Persian Gulf to undertake more protective measures. So on that July 3rd of 1988, the USS Vincennes, I'm not sure to pronounce that, under the command of Captain William C. Rogers III, was involved in several skirmishes with Iranian vessels. According to various reports, Rogers, who had a reputation for aggressiveness, ignored orders to change course and instead continued to pursue the enemy gunboats. Against this background, the Iranian airliner, an Airbus A300, departed Iran at approximately 10:47 a.m. headed to Dubai, the United Arab Emirates. Crewmen aboard the ship immediately began tracking this Iran Air Flight 655, which had taken off from an airport used by both military and commercial aircraft. For the next several minutes, there was confusion aboard the U.S. cruiser over the identity of the aircraft, which was eventually determined to be a much smaller F-14 fighter jet. Much smaller. So here they are, in 1988. We had some pretty modern tracking equipment, well-trained military, but they claimed they mistook this Air Flight 655, a commercial airliner, for this smaller F-14 fighter jet. So after several warning calls went unheeded, the ship fired 2 surface-to-air missiles at 10:54 a.m., destroyed the plane, and killed all those aboard. A lot of people died immediately, 290 to be exact. Immediately after this event, the U.S. officials reported that the Iranian airliner had been rapidly descending and was headed toward this ship. In other words, they claimed the ship was being attacked. In addition, it was stated that Iran Air Flight 655 was not within its normal route. Well, however, a U.S. Navy report as of July 28, 1988, released to the public in redacted form on August 19th, refuted these claims. It concluded that the Iranian aircraft was actually ascending, not descending, within the established air route. And it was traveling at a much slower speed than reported by the U.S. ship. Furthermore, the airliner's failure to communicate with the ship was dismissed. In contact with 2 air control towers, the Iranian pilot was likely not checking the International Air Distress Channel. In the end, U.S. officials concluded that it was a tragic and regrettable accident. Does this sound what similar to what's going on today? Does it sound like a repeat of history here? Listen to this. In explaining how the state-of-the-art cruiser had misidentified the Iran Air Flight 655, authorities cited stress and unconscious distortion of data. However, U.S. officials also claimed that Iranian aggression played a key role in the incident. In 1990, the U.S. Navy notably awarded Rogers, just a very aggressive guy, the Legion of Merit for his outstanding service during operations in the Persian Gulf. Some, however, accused the U.S. military of a cover-up. It was noted that investigators failed to interview others near this ship, notably the commander of the USS Sides, some of whose personnel had identified the aircraft as a commercial plane, as well as the surface warfare commander who had ordered Rogers to change course several hours before the incident. In addition, the report statement that this ship was in international waters was later acknowledged as incorrect. This cruiser that shot those missiles was in Iranian waters. In Iran, it was widely believed that the U.S. attack had been deliberate, and Iranian authorities worried that it indicated the United States was planning to join forces with Iraq. That assumption was thought to have played a role in Iran's decision to agree to a ceasefire with Iraq in August of '88. In May of '89, Iran filed a lawsuit against the United States at the International Court of Justice. As the case dragged on, a settlement was reached in 1996, whereby the United States, which expressed deep regret for shooting down an Iran Air Flight 655, agreed to pay $61.8 million to the victim's family, and Iran dropped its suit. So I posted that on my timeline. I want you to do that comparison. What took place in '88, where we shot down an Iranian plane, and we claimed it to be a mistake. And now we have this incident today. I say today, just this recent incident that's taking place. That I don't know how do you put this? It is way too similar to ignore. So the headlines this morning is kind of like the headlines we saw in 1988. Iran says it unintentionally shot down Ukrainian airliner. After maintaining for days that there was no evidence to show one of its missiles had struck the plane, the Iranian military said it was an accident caused by human error. Gosh, it sounds so similar to 1988's event, doesn't it? Iran announced early Saturday that it had accidentally shot down a Ukrainian passenger jet, blaming it on human error because of what it calls the plane's sharp, unexpected turn toward a sensitive military base, according to a statement issued by the country's military. Gosh, it's the same playbook from 1988, except Iran shot it down and saying they shot it down versus the United States shooting one down. It's the exact same playbook. You could almost reverse claims that mechanical issues caused the crash of the aircraft, which killed all 176 people. It persistently denied that Iranian military defenses had downed the aircraft. International pressure had been building on Iran to take responsibility. American and allied intelligence assessments have said that Iranian missiles brought down the plane. And anyway, blah, 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 blah. And what do you believe? What do you don't believe? But what do you have to pay attention to in all this reporting that we have is the similarities between these cases, the repeat of history, if you will. What do we garner from all this? What can be gained from all this? So this is why I call this critical thinking. It's critical thinking simply because, excuse me 1 minute. Okay, 1 second. I just have to deal with something here real quick. Okay. You know, you cannot take things at face value. Now, how much do I blame the media? I only partially blame the media. I blame the media for not asking enough questions. But then it's the same with the average citizen out here not asking the right questions. just taking things at face value. Now, some may want to say, "Oh, you're a conspiracy theorist," and all this kind of stuff. But I want you to think about a couple of things here as we go through this, and I want to share just in end up in brevity here, really. Um, Pull something up here so I can speak with some kind of authority. Uh, so let's start with this, and through our history. One of the incidents, and some of this is not that old, but I'm going to go to, gosh, the late 19th century. We'll start there. So I don't know what it is that we've had with this thing with syphilis and whatnot, but we go all the way back to the 1880s in Hawaii. A California physician working at a hospital for lepers injected 6 girls over the age of 12 with syphilis. In 1895, a New York pediatrician, Henry Hammond, intentionally injected 2 mentally disabled boys, one 4-year-old and one 16-year-old, with gonorrhea as part of a medical experiment. A review of the medical literature of the late 19th and early 20th centuries found more than 40 reports of experimental injections with gonorrhea culture, including some where gonorrhea organisms were applied to the eyes of sick children. U.S. Army doctors in the Philippines injected 5 prisoners with bubonic plague and induced beriberi in 29 prisoners. 4 of the test subjects died as a result. In 1906, Professor Richard Strong of Harvard University intentionally infected 24 Filipino prisoners with cholera, which had somehow become contaminated with the plague. He did this without the consent of his patients and without informing them of what he was doing, and all the subjects became sick, and 13 of them died. Move on into the early 20th century. In 1908, 3 Philadelphia researchers infected dozens of children with tuberculosis at the St. Vincent's House orphanage in Philadelphia, caused permanent blindness in some of the children and painful lesions and inflammation of the eyes in many others. It's really hard to read this stuff. It's just true, though. It's just verifiably true. It's not conspiracy theory bullshit. It's not woo-woo shit. It is real. And it just goes on and on and on and on and on. In the study, they refer to the children as material used. Material used. 1909, F.C. Knowles released a study describing how he had deliberately infected 2 children in an orphanage with Molluscum contagiosum, a virus that causes wart-like growths after an outbreak in the orphanage, in order to study the disease. In 1911, Noguchi of the Rockefeller Institute of Medical Research injected 146 hospital patients, some of whom were children, with syphilis. He was later sued by the parents of some of the child subjects who allegedly contracted syphilis as a result of his experiments. Then the all too well-known Tuskegee syphilis experience that happened just south of me and ended about the time I graduated from high school. The Tuskegee syphilis experiments was a clinical study concluded between 1932 and 1972 in Tuskegee, Alabama, by the U.S. Public Health Service. U.S. Public Health Service. In the experiments, 399 impoverished black males who had syphilis were offered treatment by the researchers, who did not tell the test subjects that they had syphilis and did not give them treatment for the disease, but rather just studied them to chart the progress of the disease. In 1947, penicillin became available as treatment, but those running the study prevented study participants from receiving treatment elsewhere, lying to them about their true condition so that they could observe the effects of syphilis on the human body. By the end of the study in 72, only 74 of the test subjects remained alive. 28 of the original 399 men had died of syphilis. 100 were dead of related complications. 40 of their wives had been infected, and 19 of their children were born with congenital syphilis. The study was not shut down until 1972, when its existence was leaked to the press, forcing the researchers to stop in the face of a public outcry. The U.S. led Guatemala. Syphilis experiences a lesser known version of the exact same thing. Now, I'm sharing this because this is no bullshit. This is real. This is not ancient history. Some of this happened in my lifetime. In 1941, the University of Michigan virologist Thomas Francis and Jonas Salk and other researchers deliberately infected patients at several Michigan mental institutions with influenza. The virus by spreading the virus into their nasal passages. Francis Peyton Roos, based at the Rockefeller Institute and editor of the Journal of Experimental Medicine, wrote the following to Francis regarding the experiments. Here's what he wrote. It may save you much trouble if you publish your paper elsewhere than the Journal of Experimental Medicine. The journal is under constant scrutiny by the anti-vivisectionists who would not hesitate to play up the fact that you used for your test human beings of a state institution. That the tests were wholly justified goes without saying. Roos closely monitored the articles he published since the 1930s, when revival of the anti-vivisectionist movement raised pressure against certain human experimentation. In 1941, Dr. William C. Black inoculated a 12-month-old baby with herpes who was offered as a volunteer. He submitted his research to the Journal of Experimental Medicine, which rejected the findings due to the ethically questionable research methods used in the study. Roos called the experiment an abuse of power, an infringement of the rights of an individual, and not excusable because the illness which followed had implications for science. The study was later published in the Journal of Pediatrics. The Stateville Penitentiary Malaria Study was a controlled study of the effects of malaria on the prisoners of Stateville Penitentiary near Joliet, Illinois, beginning in the 40s. The study was conducted by the Department of Medicine at the University of Chicago in conjunction with the United States Army and the State Department. At the Nuremberg trials, Nazi doctors cited the precedent of the malaria experience as part of their defense. The study continued at Stateville Penitentiary for 29 years. In related studies from 44 to 46, Dr. Alf Alving, a professor of the University of Chicago Medical School, purposely infected psychiatric patients at the Illinois State Hospital with malaria so that he could test experimental treatments on them. In 46 and 48, a study in Guatemala, U.S. researchers used prostitutes to infect prison inmates, insane asylum patients, and Guatemalan soldiers with syphilis and other sexually transmitted diseases in order to test the effectiveness of penicillin in treating STDs. They later tried infecting people with direct inoculations made from syphilis bacteria poured into the men's penises and on forearms and faces that were slightly abraded, or in a few cases through spinal punctures. Approximately 700 people were infected as part of the study, including orphan children. The study was sponsored by the Public Health Service and the National Institute of Health, the Pan American Health Sanitary Bureau, now the World Health Organization's Pan American Health Organization, and the Guatemalan government. The team was led by John Charles Cutler, who later participated in the Tuskegee syphilis experiments. Cutler chose to do the study in Guatemala because he would not have been permitted to do so in the United States. In 2010, when the researchers revealed, 2010, you're listening to this, right? In 2010, when the research was revealed, the U.S. officially apologized to Guatemala for the studies. And that was none other than the much hated Hillary Clinton that made that apology. And those who hate her actually despised her for even making that apology. A lawsuit had been launched against Johns Hopkins University, Bristol Myers Squibb, the pharmaceutical company, and Rockefeller Foundation for alleged involvement in the study. This goes on and on and on and on. 1950s, in order to conduct a simulation of a biological warfare attack, U.S. Army or U.S. Navy sprayed large quantities of the bacteria Serratia, I can't pronounce it, considered harmless at the time, over the city of San Francisco. They sprayed the whole city with this bacteria. Our wonderful, wonderful government. And you still trust these motherfuckers. They did this. Oh, gosh. The 50s. And people don't want to question. They want to call people conspiracy theory. Oh, they wouldn't do that. But look at what we've done just in the last 100 years. Sprayed this shit over the city of San Francisco during a project called Operation Sea Spray. And people want to scoff at people that say something about chemtrails. God, please, wake up. Question, question, question. That's how these things get revealed, is because some few had the common sense to say, no, something's wrong here. Something's not right. Oh, Jesus. Yes. Okay, now where are we? I'm sorry, I got numerous citizens contracted pneumonia-like illnesses, and at least one person died as a result. They killed him. The family of one man who died sued the government for gross negligence, but a federal judge ruled in favor of the government in 1981. These tests were continued until at least 1969. I was 15 years old before he stopped it. Also in 1950, Dr. Joseph Stokes of the University of Pennsylvania deliberately infected 200 female prisoners with viral hepatitis. From the 50s to 72, mentally disabled children at the Willowbrook State School in Staten Island, New York, were intentionally infected with viral hepatitis for research whose purpose was to help discover a vaccine. From 1963 to 1966, Saul Krugman of North University promised the mentally disabled children that their children would be enrolled into Willowbrook in exchange for signing a consent form for procedures that he claimed were vaccinations. God. In reality, the procedures involved deliberately infecting children with viral hepatitis by feeding them an extract made from the feces of patients infected with the disease. This was from the 50s to 1972. This is not ancient. This is in my lifetime. I graduated high school in 73. Oh, 1952. Chester Southam, a Sloan Kettering Institute researcher, injected live cancer cells known as HeLa cells into prisoners at the Ohio State Penitentiary and cancer patients. Also, at Scan Kettering, 300 healthy women were injected with live cancer cells without being told. The doctor stated they knew at the time that it might cause cancer. In 1953, Frank Olson died from a fall from a hotel building after being unknowingly doped up with LSD by the CIA 9 days prior. The San Francisco Chronicle, December 17, 1979, I was already out of school, page 5, reported a claim by the Church of Scientology that the CIA conducted an open-air biological warfare experience in 1955 near Tampa, Florida, and elsewhere in Florida with whooping cough bacteria. It was alleged that the experiment tripled the whooping cough infections in Florida to over 1,000 cases and caused whooping cough deaths in the state to be increased from 1 to 12 over the previous year. This claim has been cited in a number of later sources, although these added no further supporting evidence. During the 1950s, the United States conducted a series of field tests using entomological weapons. Operation Big Itch, the year I was born in 1954, was designed to test munitions loaded with uninfected fleas. In May 1955, over 300,000 uninfected mosquitoes were dropped over parts of the U.S. state of Georgia to determine if the air-dropped mosquitoes could survive to take meals for humans. The mosquito tests were known as Operation Big Buzz. The U.S. engaged in at least 2 other EW testing programs, Operation Dropkick and Operation Mayday. I hope you're listening to this. This is real. This is not a joke. This is something. That's all I can say. This is really, really, really something. And you trust these guys, and you think that somehow voting is going to be the big thing here. I hate to tell you, but people voted all the way through this. Get back to my page here. Here we go. All right. 1960s. In 1963, again, I would emphasize during my lifetime. Excuse me, I gotta take a drink here. 22 elderly patients at the Jewish Chronic Disease Hospital in Brooklyn, New York, were injected with live cancer cells by Chester M. Southam, who in 1952 had done the same to prisoners at the Ohio State Prison, if you remember his name a little bit earlier, in order to discover the secret of how healthy bodies fight the invasion of malignant cells. The administration of the hospital attempted to cover the study up, but the New York Medical Licensing Board ultimately placed Southam on probation for a year. 2 years later, the American Cancer Society elected him as their vice president. You wonder why we haven't cured cancer. You wonder why. From 1963 to 1969, as part of Project Shipboard Hazard and Defense, SHAD, U.S. Army performed tests which involved spraying several U.S. ships with various biological and chemical warfare agents, while thousands of U.S. military personnel were aboard the ships. The personnel were not notified of the test and were not given any protective clothing. Chemicals tested on the U.S. military personnel included the nerve gas VX and sarin. Toxic chemicals such as zinc, cadmium sulfide, and sulfur dioxide, and a variety of biological agents. In 1966, the U.S. Army released Bacillus globigi into the tunnels of the New York City subway system as part of an experiment called A Study of the Vulnerability of Subway Passengers in New York City to Covert Attack with Biological Agents. The Chicago subway system was also subject to a similar experiment by the freaking Army. Oh God. Then we get into radiation experiments. I mean, this is to say it's wild is not to go anywhere. I mean, and you wonder, this is not ancient freaking history. We're not going back way back in history. My grandmother was the subject of a frontal lobotomy, which back in the early part of the 20th century was an almost common procedure. Something they don't. I mean, they look at it antiquated now. These things are real. And if you still think that that they that you can trust these guys, please. And I'm not through yet. This goes on and on and on into infinity, and I'm going to keep on and share a lot of this with you today. By the way, I'm simulcasting this on 4 different platforms, Facebook and YouTube, as I go along here. This is powerful stuff. So now we're going to talk about the radioactive iodine experiments. Now, see, other podcasters and whatnot used to talk about these things and try to expose things, but now they get political. Like Alex Jones, he all of a sudden he wants to get all political instead of, you know, standing for the people. So, I think people like him started out on pretty solid ground, and then all of a sudden they start siding with this politician. They get too political, and they miss the whole point that it just don't matter on the political side of it. In 1949, operation called the Green Run, the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission, these are government agencies, released iodine 131 and xenon 133 into the atmosphere near the Hanford site in Washington, which contaminated a 500,000 acre area containing 3 small towns. In 1953, the AEC, Atomic Energy Commission, radioactive iodine in newborns and pregnant women. In one study, researchers gave pregnant women from 100 to 200 microcuries of iodine 131 in order to study the women's aborted embryos in an attempt to discover at what stage and to what extent radioactive iodine crosses the placental barrier. In another study, they gave 25 newborn babies who were under 36 hours old and weighed from 5.5 to 8.5 pounds iodine 131, either by oral administration or through an injection, so that they could measure the amount of iodine in their thyroid glands as iodine would go to that gland. In another AEC, Atomic Energy Commission study, researchers at the University of Nebraska College of Medicine fed iodine 131 to 28 healthy infants through a gastric tube to test the concentration of iodine in the infant's thyroid glands. In 1953, the AEC sponsored a study to discover if radioactive iodine affected premature babies differently from full-term babies. In this experiment, researchers from Harper Hospital in Detroit orally administered iodine 131 to 65 premature and full-time infants who weighed from 2.1 to 5.5 pounds. From 1955 to 1960, Sonoma State Hospital in Northern California served as a permanent drop-off location for mentally disabled children diagnosed with cerebral palsy or lesser disorders. The children subsequently underwent painful experimentation without adult consent. Many were given spinal taps, for which they received no direct benefit. Reporters on 60 Minutes learned that in those 5 years, the brain of every child with cerebral palsy who died in Sonoma State was removed and studied without parental consent. According to the CBS story, over 1,400 patients died at the clinic. In an experiment in the 1960s, over 100 Alaskan citizens were continually exposed to radioactive iodine. In 1962, the Hanford site again released iodine 131, stationing test subjects along its path to record its effect on them. The AEC also recruited Hanford volunteers to ingest milk contaminated with I-131 during this time. Uranium. Between 1946 and 1947, researchers at the University of Rochester injected uranium-234 and uranium-235 in dosages ranging from 6.4 to 70.7 micrograms per kilogram of body weight into 6 people to study how much uranium their kidneys could tolerate before becoming damaged. Between 1953 and 1957, at the Massachusetts General Hospital, Dr. William Sweet injected 11 terminally ill, comatose, and semi-comatose patients with uranium in an experiment to determine, among other things, its viability as chemotherapy treatment against brain tumors, which all but one of the patients had, one being a misdiagnosis. Dr. Sweet, who died in 2001, maintained that consent had been obtained from the patients and next of kin. Plutonium experiments from 1945, April 10th, to July 18, 1947, 18 people were injected with plutonium as part of the Manhattan Project. You may have heard that term before. Doses administered ranged from 95 to 5,900 nanocuries. Albert Stevens, a man misdiagnosed with stomach cancer, received treatment for his cancer at the UC San Francisco Medical Center in 1945. Dr. Joseph Gilbert Hamilton, a Manhattan Project doctor in charge of the human experiments in California, had Stevens injected with Pu-238 and Pu-239 plutonium without informed consent. Stevens never had cancer. A surgery to remove cancerous cells was highly successful in removing the benign tumor, and he lived for another 20 years with the injected plutonium. Since Stevens received the highly radioactive plutonium-238, his accumulated dose over the remaining life was higher than anyone had ever received, 64 SV. Neither Albert Stevens nor any of his relatives were told that he never had cancer. They were led to believe that the experimental treatment had worked. His cremated remains were acquired by the Argonne National Laboratory Center for Human Radiobiology in 1975 without the consent of surviving relatives. Some of the ashes were transferred to the National Human Radiobiology Tissue Repository at Washington State University, which keeps the remains of people who died having radioisotopes in their bodies. 3 patients at Billings Hospital at the University of Chicago were injected with plutonium. In 1946, 6 employees of Chicago Metallurgical Lab were given water that was contaminated with plutonium-239 so that researchers could study how plutonium is absorbed into the digestive tract. An 18-year-old woman at an upstate New York hospital expecting to be treated for pituitary gland disorder was injected with plutonium. This goes on and on and on and on and on and on and for every kind of the possible thing. And I am honestly just tired of going over it. Why is this important? Because I'm going back to questioning. And this is what people don't do enough of, is this questioning. And this has been backed, sanctioned, and performed by our government. It's not anything, as they say, new. It is very real. So if you look at what's going on with these commercial airlines, one in 1988 and then one in 2020, being shot down in the Middle East, once admission by the United States, which killed over 200 people, and then the one that Iran has admitted to, both by accident. I shared this on my Facebook timeline. I want you to just, I'm not claiming to have answers. See, I'm not claiming to say, oh, I've got this figured out. That is not where I'm coming from at all. I am not in any way sitting here saying, I've got this figured out. I am sitting here saying, look at the possibilities. Ask questions. This is where we've got a problem. The questions are not being asked. And that's where we're failing on this whole program. Because the questions have not been asked, there's other things that some of which I didn't even go through a whole list of this stuff that's taken place, sanctioned by our government, performed on our citizens, and how many times have they sprayed stuff into our atmosphere, experimenting like they did? I mean, really, it's known. It's not a joke. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's a conspiracy fact. These things took place. Sorry, you can hide from it, run from it, whatever. It's just the fact. It's real. And the failure of our media now is not asking enough questions, not asking the right questions. They just grossly are missing what their jobs should be to keep a well-informed public, because we're not well-informed at all. With all the information we've got, we are piss poorly informed as to what's really going on in the world. Thank you for joining me this morning. That is a little bit less than an hour broadcast this morning, but I'm going to shut this down in a moment, and this will be up here, I guess, for your review as it goes along. So what we're seeing taking place in Iran with that airplane being shot down, a civilian airplane, go back and compare that to that flight that took place in 1988, and it's like it's the same playbook. What it means, I cannot tell you. I'm just saying that somebody that has the resources should be digging into this and asking the right questions, and I don't see that taking place. Have a great day. Storms coming in through the southeast all through the day. Be careful. Take care and peace.